Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's breakfast somewhere, so eat up. Welcome to Breakfast with Vinnie. Food for thought. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show today. And this is going to be an interesting topic. We're going to talk about beauty today. I'm going to get into that today with a very special guest that I have, who is an art historian, entrepreneur, businesswoman, artist. She has her own channel called The War on Beauty, who really, really struck me when I saw her channel. Please welcome to the podcast, Julia James Davis.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction and for having me. I'm so grateful to be here and I'm excited for our conversation.
Thanks, Julia. Me too. Thanks for being here. So yeah, it's interesting. We're going to talk today about beauty and something that is you've really, really made it your mission to dive into to sort of, make people aware of what it really is and how deep the scope of beauty reaches and how big the sphere is. And I think it's great because it reaches into so many areas of our lives. And so, we'll talk about it like, what is it? What does it mean? What is beauty? Define beauty. So before I ask you to answer that question, here are some examples over the centuries. I made some notes here. And, here's from Oxford Languages: beauty, noun, a combination of qualities such as shape, color, or form that pleases the aesthetic senses, especially the sight. Quote, I was struck by her beauty, quote. Of course. So, but what did Aristotle say about beauty? For Aristotle, beauty is symmetry. What did Plato say about beauty? He viewed beauty as an objective, transcendent form, an ideal and perfect reality beyond the physical world, which particular beautiful things only partially participate in or resemble. In dialogues like the Symposium and Phaedrus, he describes on the ladder of love, where an individual's initial appreciation of physical beauty ascends through the beauty of the soul, laws, knowledge, and ultimately to the form of beauty, the ultimate source of all beauty and a gateway to the good. So, and according to the Bible, beauty is a reflection of God's glory. God's creation is described as good and beautiful, showcasing his splendor. Psalm 27:4 highlights seeking God's beauty, implying that true beauty is found in his presence and character. First Peter 3 and 4 encourages believers to cultivate inner beauty through a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in his sight. Beauty is a gift from God. He made it and it flows from him because he is beautiful. Psalm 27:4. So we have various descriptives of beauty here. And lastly, what did Nietzsche say about beauty? He viewed beauty not as an objective concept, but a subjective and aristocratic affirmation of life, power, and the triumph of order over chaos, often emerging from a deeper, sometimes terrible truth. Acknowledging beauty involved in recognizing hierarchy and difference, and he found the ability to appreciate at the sign of a noble soul. So we have all of these differing, definitions over the ages of beauty. And, when we look at those, I mean, I think some of them could be viewed as mere opinion, but really, first of all, how do we reconcile all those things? Secondly, if I were to just ask you, what is beauty? What would you say? And what would you say to all of that?
So I think that all of those definitions have some aspect of truth to them. I personally believe in the more Christian definition of beauty, as you said, and I think it was, yeah, you said in the Bible that beauty is truth and goodness. And that's also something that was really kind of established, like you said, by Aristotle and Plato and some of the ancient classic philosophers. So over time, beauty has always been associated with truth and with God's realm. And I guess the ancients wouldn't call it God, but Plato would say the form of the good, kind of like that eternal space that is pure goodness. I think that the best definition of beauty is actually, I think, by Keats. It's that beauty is truth and truth is beauty, and that's all we know and all we need to know. So, in my opinion, that and then also with the Oxford Dictionary definition of beauty, that's really more like the visual beauty, but reconciling that, that which we see pleases us, kind of that, the visual beauty or the audible beauty of music, visual beauty of painting, architecture, sculpture, with this more transcendent spiritual beauty. I think that there's different types and forms of beauty, but that true beauty, all of it, whether it be visual beauty or musical beauty or spiritual beauty, like,
Mhm.
for example, the beauty of faith or the beauty of a virtue like charity and kindness and love. Those things are beautiful, but they're not tangible in the same way as music or painting. But I think that what unites those two different kinds of beauty, one being a very like metaphysical beauty, with one being the tangible beauty, is that they do channel in some way that transcendent mystery of God. There's this Catholic philosopher who I love. His name is Dietrich von Hildebrand, and he talks about how all beauty is an echo of heaven. That and then also that's a very like Platonic way to see it as well, because that anything that's beautiful is kind of getting at that form of pure goodness, that one truth. So that's my definition of beauty. I think that it's a little bit hard to define, and I'm not sure if that was super straightforward, but in a way, I think it is. It's that beauty is truth and goodness, and that beauty matters. Yeah, and I think I was going to say one thing else, but it kind of flipped out of my mind. So yeah, but that's what I would say beauty is. And oh, and lastly, that I think that beauty is a mystery. So in some way it's difficult to define because there's something non-graspable about it because it's so wide and deep and you just can't really define it. I think kind of in the same way you can't really define the big concepts like God. If you can define it, then it's not the right definition. It's just you recognize it when you see it, and when you see it, it points you upwards, it lifts you up towards God, and it strikes you as the truth.
That's actually a great definition, and I get it completely. So, and it really shows, uh, how myopic our definition of beauty has become in our modern age. And really, I think you revealed probably why it has been that way because in our modern age, we don't, our sense of the transcendence has been tainted, first of all, and it's visible in many ways, i.e., the lack of beauty in a lot of things that we see in form. In terms of the Platonic things, wasn't it Plato who said that everything exists in form first in the ether and then is manifest? I mean, I may be misquoting that concept, but
Mhm.
it makes sense to me
Yeah.
in terms of what I'm saying. And I think that, you know, that's really great what you said. It makes me think that we've re-semanticized. I don't even know if that's a word, but it is now,
Yeah.
with semantics, our definition of beauty,
Yeah.
simply because we have not anchored or we've broken the tether to our sense of the transcendent being revealed through beauty, or
Mhm.
however you want to put that. But and we see that blatantly in our spiritual deficit. I mean, you think we have a spiritual deficit in society? You think? Yeah, just a little, you know. And also how it's just throw away this, throw away that, and the materialistic, and therefore the myopia has sort of redefined beauty in terms of wow, look at her,
Yeah.
or ooh, that's a great looking car, things like that. But there are so and you tied it beautifully to that quote that beauty is truth and truth is beauty, which really kind of prefaced what I was going to ask as beauty being a virtue or some sort of a pointed to a moral good. And I would have to say that, from what you've said, it is that. It's all of that, pointing to a higher good. It's inextricably tied to that. You would agree with that, obviously, right?
I would agree with that. I think that true beauty, I think that there's another type of visual I guess it's been termed beauty, like you said. Our contemporary secular society has attempted to redefine beauty to
Mhm.
mean makeup and, having physical beauty or material possessions, like having a sports car or a watch or fashion, when this is not what beauty means. And for so long, and especially in Western culture, this is just not what beauty has ever meant. But this is a recent development where we now are associating beauty with those things, and therefore society is calling it superficial when that couldn't be further from the truth. Beauty is the most unsuperficial thing. So yes, I think that, and coming from an art history background, it's interesting. I got my degree in art history from USC, but over my whole life, I have just loved art and really spent my life from the time I could remember, like 5 years old, studying art. I would just read all the books, take my mom to museums every weekend, and it was just my passion. And I think, first of all, as a side note, I think that kinda shows the universal and powerful transcendent aspect of beauty, that you can be someone that's, however old you are, not being educated, and you can appreciate and recognize true beauty. And I think that that's an innate sense that all human beings have, but then kind of progressing into wanting to study that in school and college, the more that they start teaching you that art history basically is started, in the classical era, and then and you're progressing all the way from a beautiful classical era sculpture like the Laocoon, and then you're going to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, and it's a progression all the way until modern times to, for example, like the Duchamp's toilet. That that art and beauty doesn't really exist, and that art is continuing and progressing all the way into basically what we have today, which is just conceptual, and I think outright ugly and purposefully ugly art. And if you don't get it, that means that you're just not educated or understand enough about art history to get why the Duchamp toilet is brilliant, or a white canvas by Robert Rauschenberg is so important. But yeah, that we've somewhere along the line, and I think kind of going back to that Nietzsche quote, which is so great, is that somewhere along the line, we've made beauty subjective when it's something objective. It's something that truly exists out in the world, separate from us, that is a property of objects. It's a real quality and thing that exists in the world. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter if we recognize it or not. It's good if we can. But somewhere along the line, understanding of beauty went from it's a real thing to it's not real and beauty's in the eye of the beholder, which then has led to all sorts of, in my opinion, regression in the arts. And we've seen how that's also impacted even just our daily lives. It's not just those contemporary art museums, because we've seen it in our buildings, our stores, our music, our film, our fashion, everything, our advertising, everywhere we go now. It's that beauty's just totally been thrown out the window, and it's seen as something that doesn't matter.
Wow, yeah, that's very, very rich, and amen and amen. And I hear you loud and clear on all of that. There's a lot that I really wanted to touch on there. There's a lot to unpack. To back up a bit, talking about this sort of almost undefinable characteristic of beauty, there was, I remember about 20 years ago or so, I bought this book and I was really smitten by it, called Beauty by John O'Donoghue. I don't know if you've ever heard of this book, but
No.
he had actually left the priesthood, and I'm not sure why. He was Irish, and some probably a lack of reconciliation of, you know, who knows, protocol, hierarchical values. It could have been a lot of things, but he really described it in a lot of mystical ways, and I would highly recommend that. Um, Also, in terms of like, I don't know when "beauty is in the eye of the beholder" was coined as a phrase, in what part of history that actually emerged, but it almost, because of how I see modernity being sort of everything being subjective now, what is truth? If you're going to make beauty subjective, you're then going to make truth subjective.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Which is a really dangerous place to be.
Exactly.
It's and that's really sort of where we are in society, not only because we're gaslit a lot from media and propaganda, but that also in turn inhibits our ability to discern what truth is. We don't even want to trust ourselves. So this is when we really need to tune in to our intuition, which is really, let's talk to God about this, you know, and guide us, guide us through that inner voice so that we know and we can discern, the BS from, and there's a lot of it floating around, but I remember reading years ago about there was an anthropological study and it was done, can't remember who did it, but it was done with a lot of different cultures, whereby the end result continually across cultures was that there were universally consistent responses to specific stimuli that would normally be expected to be produced, such as shock and horror
Mhm.
over being unalived, remorse, guilt, joy over things that would produce joy, like a child coming into the world, sense of awe and wonder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, with that backdrop, we would have to probably, you know, conclude that there is absolutely an objective aspect to beauty because, you know, before any kind of conditioning, these things are just baked into us.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, we know that beauty is objective because you can just take a look at, what are some of the most visited sites in the world? It's like Michelangelo's David, it's the Sistine Chapel, the Grand Canyon, the things that are beautiful, like the Mona Lisa. It's all types of people from China to the Middle East to America to Latin America are flocking to those specific things. Because those
Yeah.
things are beautiful. And so it doesn't mean, oh, you have to be, you know, educated or a certain race to appreciate it. You don't have to be, some European person to love those things, but every single person will stand in front of something so beautiful like those works of art or natural works of art and recognize that it is something not only of inherent value, that our world is better for having those things, but that they are beautiful. I think that's the best word that you can possibly apply to those things. And
Yeah.
yeah, and also going back to your previous point, just about how beauty is connected to the transcendent, to God. I think one of the
Hmm.
things that, and there is kind of this moral aspect to it, one of the things that we talk a lot about on my platform, The War on Beauty, is that, what were the contexts of the cultures and the artists that were producing such monumental feats of beauty? Who were these men, Mozart, Bernini? What were the conditions that were fostering that incredible output? Well, those were societies that were very faithful. They were Christian societies, they were God-fearing, they had a basic moral code, which are things that, we look around now and we don't have that. We live in a almost entirely secular society. People are losing their faith, which I would say there's a great reversal of trend in that amongst people in Gen Z, which is amazing. But overall, people have really defected from all forms of faith, all forms of objective morality. But those are the conditions that create beauty. And we can see that living in these present day conditions, what our output is ugliness. We're not making works like, I guess a musical example I think is amazing is Mozart's Mass. Like, just such an incredible example of musical beauty, but that was all in reverence to God. And a lot of these great works were. So I think that's an important aspect, and that if we do want to get back to that, if we want to restore beauty in our society, the first thing that we have to do is to restore our virtues and our morals. which is going back to just, I think, a very basic code of faith and hard work and a level of being okay with self-sacrifice and belief in something higher than yourself.
Amen.
Yeah, because like even like the cathedrals, I think, those people were building and it took hundreds of years to build many of the great cathedrals and buildings in our world, but that was something that people were working for the future generations. And they knew they would never see their completion, but they were okay spending their life creating something that they would never see because they had a hope and faith in the future and a reverence for something outside of and higher than their self.
Wow. Beautifully, beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. And this is another thing that's very, very rich. If I knew shorthand, I would have been taking notes to comment on each and every one of those things because it just opens up the conversation in a very rich way. I remember the first time I saw the Pietà, my it was the most breathtaking thing I'd ever seen. And so we do have this common sense of awe and appreciation for those things. It's people are going to go and see the Grand Canyon, go see the wonders of the world more than they're going to go see an oil change shop in the middle of Pacoima. Like they're not going to go there. They're just not. And in fact, I would then even go so far as to say that environmentally, just being in places like that versus being in a place where architecture, structures, dwellings are integrated with nature, you would definitely feel a sense different. You would feel completely different on it, just on a level of health and well-being, physically, mentally, and spiritually. That's why people go to these places for vacations. But,
Yes.
but, why can't we just live like that? And if you're going to build city centers to attract people to live in cities, then, back in the glorious days of, let's say New York, where it was Art Deco thrived, you could see in the 20th century, in like manner that you mentioned, where things were built for permanence and to for the future, and to sort of display the awe and reverence that they had for what inspired them to build that. Probably the closest thing we have an analog in the 20th century might be Art Deco, and it
Mhm.
and
I
and I
agree with
think
you.
and I think that after that, it seemed that everything kind of went south. It's like whatever this postmodern thing is, I have no idea. I'm referring to my notes here, where this decline in architecture, we now have this junk transience versus permanence. And I think that these rebuilds, a lot of these rebuilds, happened after World War II, where things had to be rebuilt really quickly. But unfortunately, it caught on as an aesthetic, you know, or an anti-aesthetic as it,
Yeah.
you know, and I just, I wonder if at least a partial attribution of this is due to the zeitgeist of varying periods reflected in the beauty or lack thereof. But the zeitgeist has to be the result of forces that shape it. And propaganda included. And each period in modern history is much shorter. I mean, we don't define an epochs anymore. The age of enlightenment, the dark ages,
Mhm.
this more or less defined by shorter periods like the industrial revolution, now the intelligence revolution, and even shorter and simultaneously jarring and opposing periods like wartime and peacetime, periods of massive expansion and contraction. And so we're left with this junk heap, and we have to try to find a way to reclaim our sense of aesthetic. And as you very well said, it has to be grounded in our sense of morals or ethics. But I personally believe, call me crazy, but I believe that there's been a war on the West. And I think that, people will attack religion and say, well, it's just a system of control. And like government isn't. How about that? You know, what's government? You want to talk about control. How about being controlled without you even knowing you're being controlled through really, really insidious techniques delivered through media? I mean, we were given techniques commercially 30 years ago via books and courses on NLP and how to persuade people. And if the public was given that long ago, what do you think they know that they're using on us? I mean, come on. So I really think that that war is attacking, calling religion just some systematized thing that's just bad.
Yeah.
Versus, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean? Versus looking at the spiritual aspect. And even, I mean, look, I'm quite a bit older than you, so there are things that I remember that, for example, like when I was a kid, the sort of your sphere of influence and help were like family, friends, and clergy.
Mm.
Now it's like, your therapist is your best friend if you can
Yeah.
afford them. So yeah. And there's a shift in common decency and all that sort of stuff. So it's definitely tied to morality. I mean, I can't see another way around it. So thanks for pointing that one out. That's a big one.
Thank you. Well, I first of all completely agree with everything you said. You brought up a lot of points to consider there. I think what your last point about our shifting understanding of community is so true. We're a lot more isolated, and there has been this outside push to
Mhm.
under the name of progression, oh, we're getting more enlightened, we're getting more, you know, we understand more, but it feels honestly like if you look around, are things getting better? I think things are getting objectively worse at a very fast pace. And I do think that in terms of beauty, it's not accidental. I think that there is a outside influence on these things, whether that be from the government or from educational institutions. I think that there has been a conscious and a purposeful push away from beauty, and I'm still trying to understand why that is, but I think that, like you said, if truth is beauty and it can inspire you to faith in God, well, that's kind of the thing about Christianity and, historically, is if you have faith in God, if you have faith in something higher than yourself, then you're a lot less easy to control. Then you're willing to you're not as attached to your life. You are willing to die for something that you believe in, or and also with the church, I think the more that we've kind of gone away from, having the clergy as something that we go to for advice, or sacraments like confession, and shifted that to things like therapy, the a lot more mentally ill we're not getting better.
Thank
um
you.
but I think, one of the points that you brought up, reminded me of this incredible quote that I jotted down from this great series on it's from the BBC, but it's on Amazon. There was this wonderful art historian, and he was the curator and head of the National Gallery in London. Kenneth Clark, he has a great series called Civilizations. It was
Mhm.
on the BBC, but you can find it on Amazon Prime. And it's from I think it's the late 60s, but he quotes this art historian, art critic named John Ruskin. And he has a quote. He said, and he was back in kind of the late 1800s, he said, "Great nations write their autobiographies in three manuscripts: the book of their deeds, the book of their words, and the book of their art. But not one of these books can be understood unless we read the two others. But of the three, the only trustworthy one is the last." So that you can judge a society basically entirely almost based on their artistic cultural output. And I think that there's a lot of forces that are shaping ours right now. I mean, we see it for example, in the music that we're fed. There's another great, aesthetic philosopher, Roger Scruton, who talks about how modern pop music has become oppressive, that we're constantly just listening to music at all times, whether it's in the store shopping or when you're out to dinner with your family, and a lot of the times the music is really vulgar and is so either violent or, graphic in some other ways, and so you can't look at our art, you can't look at our movies or hear the music that is out now and not say there's some sort of social engineering or thing happening, because it's all the same. It's all pointing you back down to this material, earthly plain, like, nothing about it is lifting you up, and I think on the contrary, it's sort of programming this hopelessness and just this very immediate, either, like, material thing or is just outright ugly as it relates to our art and our architecture. So I do think that there's something going on, and that was kind of my first segue into the war on beauty because after, in college, I worked, and during college, I worked in the contemporary art space and in, my study abroad, I studied at Sotheby's and specifically, uh the with an emphasis on contemporary art. So I'm coming at this from my most of my background is really in contemporary art because that's really what I was the most interested in and truly loved. But when I graduated and started to, well, I started a business. I restarted my great grandfather's dress company called J Day Dress Co. And that is kind of how I got into design and as you mentioned, my entrepreneurial aspect, but, yeah, so as I started to kinda get into these things and alongside that conversion into Christianity, I became a Catholic. I was raised in a secular Jewish household, and the more that I connected to God and to faith, the more that I started to see, "Wait, this is not right. This is not right. Our art, our music, something has gone wrong and it does feel intentional and so that's kind of the background of how I got into the war on beauty. And I forgot where I was going with that, but I'll stop there.
You know what? It's okay. That was a great progression of thought, and so I agree with you. But before I jump in here, y- there was a period where you had a bout with atheism as well. Is that right?
Yes, like through college and
Hmm.
well really, in high school and college. And I think that might be a common experience,
Hmm.
but just going through young adolescence, not thinking there's anything out there, that
Right, right.
everything is just kind of nothing.
Ah, sure. This, yeah, I know. Which I could never get my head around that whole nihilistic thought thing. It's a bit nonsensical to me. But anyway, that's me. But the reason why I brought that up is to ask you a question. When you had this little soiree with atheism, is it safe to assume that you didn't notice? Hang on a second. Right, there's something wrong here. Probably you didn't think of social engineering. You didn't think of a deficit of any kind of thing or absence of the sacred or right. None of this to you. It was probably like, and is that safe to assume that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I did not think about beauty ever. I think it's really interesting because and really my whole life has been so centered around art. And so it has been interesting to see, growing up when you're really young and the things that you're initially drawn to and love. For me, it was like all the classical art, all of the neoclassical, the Caravaggio, all of those beautiful works of art. And then as I got older and the more I got, I guess into the world and kind of, I suppose and although I wasn't raised with faith, I think that there's something about just being a child that you recognize certain things a lot more clearly and you have a better understanding of things. But then growing up, my art tastes did change very dramatically to a lot of the things I would now call objectively ugly, but it never occurred to me that those things weren't good pieces of art or weren't yeah, that they honestly weren't even art. But I think that along with that, there's a big part of the education that I had that played a role in that, because when you go through art history, they're teaching you, first of all, like a ground rule is you can never call anything beautiful. That's just off limits. You can't use that word to describe anything because it's seen as subjective, it's seen as not applicable. It's not even a real word to apply to something because everything is coming out of their political and social context, so everything's kind of like coming out of a power structure, why was Michelangelo great? Because he was propped up by the Catholic Church, and so you can't really say you have to use other descriptors than beauty. And, you know, you have to keep it entirely on form, and it's the technical things that you have to talk about, which I understand the point of that, teaching you about stroke and perspective and color and material and all the technical aspects, but you can never ever say that's beautiful. Couldn't write that in a paper, couldn't say that in a class. But so I do think that there was like this sort of agenda in teaching art history to then getting you okay with how we did go from a Michelangelo to a Rauschenberg or a Kazimir Malevich, which is just a black canvas, or a white canvas, and you have to say, "Wow." And then at that point, you're really primed to describe it and say, "Yeah, no, this is valuable because, all the power structures and all of those things." So, yeah.
I mean, to me, that almost it reminds me of trying to talk about jazz from a purely academic standpoint and, you know, divorcing it from any kind of, you know, descriptives of feeling and emotion because music is an emotive language. But before we get into music, just wanted to touch on that for a second. But that's really interesting that they would do that. And but on the other hand, I get it from an educational standpoint to a certain extent. But
Mhm.
it does rob this sense of objectivity of out of using the word beauty.
Well, yeah, and also, like you said with music or a painter, their last thing they're probably thinking about is the technical aspect. Maybe insofar as it helps them to achieve their vision or whatever is coming through them. But they're just thinking about the the creative act and whatever it is that has to come through them. They're not thinking about this technical thing
You know what?
or
That's
political thing.
completely okay. Okay, that's completely to me, that's completely the opposite of the way things are now. And I don't want to put the cart before the horse. I didn't want to sort of run with this. Like you threw me a carrot, I'm running after it, which is okay. But the emphasis now is completely from a musical standpoint on education. Everybody has a how-to channel on
Right.
YouTube. That's it. It's so oversaturated. Why? Because that is the gig now. There
Mm,
is no real, I mean, the other outlets for music put everything out on social media, put it out for free. There's no commerce, that's the gig. And, it's sort of like all those drummers and people out there that, that know about me will appreciate that there's a story about the great Elvin Jones where someone asked him where he got his stuff. And he was attributed to have said, "Well, I sure didn't get it out of no book." So, it's like it's the opposite now. And I'm sure that, when Picasso was painting, somebody didn't come from behind him and go, "Babe, that eye." It's like,
yeah.
think of your people, think of your demographic, man,
Yeah.
and produce him, you know, or some like it no, these people and they had and also there was a sense of commitment, just like there was in the early days of analog recording of music. Michelangelo, I mean, he had a chisel, that's it, and some marble. There was no Command Z.
Right.
Beethoven was deaf, and he had candlelight, parchment, and a quill pen. He didn't have Command Z either. There was
Mhm.
no undo. Mozart, none of these people had Command Z. They
Yeah.
committed. They had a vision, and they were able to exercise their vision creatively with an amazing amount of skill and creativity without yeah. It's amazing to think of that. And so now it's just I think we're suffering from analysis paralysis. And I think that social engineering, just to backtrack on that a bit, has something to do with that. I mean, I talked about this before about, Edward Bernays,
Mhm.
considered to be the father, propaganda, Sigmund Freud's nephew, and yada, 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 talking about shaping public opinion. This was like over half a century ago. I mean, a lot more than that. I mean, there's a lot of areas we could cover. We could talk about beauty in terms of respect. I remember as a kid going to a gas station, and it wasn't this disheveled place with bums hanging out with a guy in there selling candy bars. You would pull into a gas station, and I'm old enough to remember this myself, and not one, not two, but three men in uniforms and hats would come running out saying, "Check your tires today, sir." One's filling up your gas tank, the other one's washing your windows, the other one's changing your oil without you even asking. Or the early days of commercial air travel before jet engines. You'd see these pictures with tablecloths and, I remember flying once, going from San Francisco to South America on an airline that's out of business now. I don't know why, but I was sitting in it may have been first class or maybe it was business class. The seats were huge, covered in sheepskin, and when the meal was served, the guy came around. The servers came around carving prime rib in front of
Wow.
me, like a restaurant. Now you're lucky if you get crackers. You'd better bring your own food on a plane, and so this kind of respect for people who are putting you in business is gone. Bank accounts
Absolutely.
don't pay interest anymore. It's like, there's a lot of things societally that are crumbling and ensnaring us by the throat, and our appreciation of the creative is no less than any other aspect of it, not one
Absolutely.
bit. And musically, I think that in terms of what affects us emotively, and I'm sorry to keep waffling on here.
No, it's this is great.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. And so, but I think that, music being an emotive language as well, you would have to sort of question why it's become more mechanized. And, I've said this before where sadly people can get used to anything.
Mhm.
Sadly being the operative word, but it's more mechanized, and elements of things that are powerful emotive vehicles, like harmony, really good harmony, good melodies that are accessible instead of just a bunch of licks, are just, gone.
Mhm. Mhm.
And why things have to be auto-tuned and quantized and mechanized, and we're ushering ourselves into, being androids or something
Yeah,
versus embracing our humanity. And like this human 2.0 is, I'm not down with it. I don't we haven't even gotten human 1.0 right yet. We're not even close, and we're just getting away from it. And so music has suffered as a result as well, I think, a lot.
absolutely. I think that well, you brought up again so many important points. Literally just yesterday saw a photo of a gas station from the 30s, and it was like you said, men in white uniforms with the hats, and they were so clean, everything was so dignified, and even down to a gas station, which now we just see as a place you can't get out of fast enough. But all of those experiences and touch points of being out in the world were a dignifying experience. I think now a lot of what the message that we receive, especially on an airplane, is that you're basically subhuman. You're pretty much just cattle. We don't care about you. We just want your money. Not only that, like sometimes they even are verbally or physically aggressive towards you. Like at the post office, everywhere you go, you're just encountered with just the most dehumanizing experiences. And all of that does matter. And I think that too with music, one of the things I talked about with my brother, because we talk about this all the time. It's like, do we don't want to live in this world like this. We're both young. My brother Hudson Davis, he's a musician, as you know. And it's like, is this how we're gonna live? Is this where we're going? This is not the world that is right. We just don't want this future for ourselves and for anybody else. And so one of the things I was talking about with Hudson was this thing about music and AI, because
Hmm.
there's something in our music now that is so mechanized, even though it is made by human beings. It doesn't. And now with AI music, you can't even almost tell the difference. Is this from a top pop star or is this from a machine? It's hard to even tell at this point, and so I do think that there has been this conditioning of people's tastes, which is something that is very malleable with things like you mentioned Edward Bernays and propaganda and all of the things that we encounter. I think that there's been this slow degradation from the good experience at the gas station to what it is now, or the great music to what it is now. It has been a process of dehumanization, and I think that that is the message of everything. Is that you don't matter, so don't think that you do.
Well said.
And lastly on that point, sorry, is I think that one of the such important things about music and about art specifically is that it is something so supremely human. There's nothing that can create or replicate the human creative process. It's just impossible. And that's what separates us from animals and is something that is so core to who we are. And that when we take art in the form of music or painting, whatever it might be, it affirms our human experience. It makes us connected to each other. Not only does it lift us up if it's something's beautiful, but it connects us to each other and helps us to work out our own human lives in some sort of way. And so I think that this transition from, art and beauty to what it is now has been such a robbing and such an important aspect of just the overall total collapse of our society. I just think those 2 things are so absolutely intertwined. But I know my little brother Hudson Davis, he is he's one of the people that I think is gonna bring beauty and music back because, like, everything you said about, what makes great music, he's really committed to that, and so I'm excited. I do see it happening with him and also with other people my age. And I think that there's something interesting in that because, like you said, you remember when the world was a better place in a way, but we don't because we were born in the era of the internet and social media. So we never really, maybe a little bit, but we never really had that experience where we were met with, dignified beautiful things. But regardless, I think that it's people from, the young Gen Z generation that are saying, wait, what is going on? Is this how we want to be? Is this how we want to live and how we want to go forward?
This is the most astonishing and beautiful thing. Speaking of beauty, the fact that you see that. You weren't even born in that era, but you see it. And I myself feel a responsibility to sort of say, hey, wait a second, guys, you know, don't discard me because I'm older, because I lived longer than you guys. You guys have the future in front of you, but I can tell you about the past
Yeah.
probably better. You might want to listen to me instead of a search engine.
Yes.
You might want to do that. Okay. And there's going to be all kinds of forces conspiring against that. But, those people, they're biased and this and that. No, I'm talking about real things, and I can speak objectively of a lack of common decency. And you can see that, and you're saying the same thing, and the fact that you're saying that Gen Z can carry the torch almost puts tears in my eyes because it gives me hope for the future. It gives me hope in humanity again. And, and the fact that that you at your age are doing this is just it really struck a chord with me when I started seeing you. And I'm always poo pooing social media and the negative aspects of it because I think in a lot of ways it's both things. It's good and bad, but in a lot of ways, it's really things are just too ubiquitous. But I learned how to be so good on social media, and look at how fast I can play. None of this would have happened if, yes, it would have, because it would have been brought forth anyway. Because that's just what happens with humans.
Mm.
It's just you may not have known about it, instantly. That's the only difference. And it
That's
would
interesting.
spread. It will spread. People will progress. They will learn, and they actually might evolve and learn at a pace that's much more akin to their humanness versus
Interesting.
trying to evolve to meet this pace that technology we can't possibly meet. You know what I mean?
That's a
Forcing us
really
to be,
interesting point, yeah.
yeah, forcing us to become and to look at this possibility of this singularity, of becoming these ubermensches, these uber humans, like that's some lofty ideal. Yeah, maybe we'll even become immortal. Sound familiar? You know,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like playing God and we're not God, and it's very seductive to many, and they're going to sell a lot of this on convenience and things like that. And so, if Gen Z wake up to this, then there's a chance that they won't be. It may not be able to be sold to them, or at
mhm,
least not so easily. And I think that, and I will go so far, and some may think that this is out of order. Me saying this, that the reasons they, poo-poo people that are older is, you know, because we have this BS meter that you
mhm,
can't really sell us BS as easily because we've seen it. We've seen the difference. You know what I mean? Whereas kids who just grew up on tablets, they don't know that. They
absolutely,
don't know it, but we do. And so I'll call out BS, you know? And so they know they can't sell it to us. So what do? Attack us, put us down. Oh, you're just some old, stupid, useless
yeah,
boomer, yada, yada, yada. And all that sort of stuff. Oh, really? You know. Speaking of music and the value of art, this is why I have Miles Davis in the background of my podcasts because of what he represents. Someone who singularly changed the shape of music and was a true artist. So, but anyway, honestly, Julia, it's like, one thing that has really come across to me in this episode of us talking is that we're not beefing about things. We're not just sort of, mindlessly complaining. And we're actually taking deep dives into things and showing an actual real deficit. And if people can't see that and don't want to climb out of it, then
mhm,
that's a sad thing indeed. But rather than just moaning about it, you're flying the flag to expose it and to show what real beauty is. And so that leads me to a final question I have for you, which is what is the way out? Is it awareness? Rather than looking at this as a problem to be solved, I'm thinking there's more like a malaise that's
mhm,
permeated society. And
yeah.
so, what is the way out of this?
Yeah, so that's the best question because that's the most important one. I think, well, first of all, to what you said about needing to connect also with people from outside of our generation and people who have experience and expertise, people like yourself, who I would say you're just a brilliant artist and someone who understands true beauty in the highest and from just incredible. But I think that there has been such an effort to sort of, like you say, brand people who are older and from an a different generation as, all those things that you said. And I think a part of that has been this, family doesn't matter, community doesn't matter. So I would say that family and community are actually two of the most important things that matter. And I think along with that, I think that families are the ones and communities are the ones that continue to foster tradition and hand down the values and morals to the younger generations. And I think that that is everything. I think if we want to get back to beauty, quite simply, we just have to look at what were the conditions that created beauty in the past. What were those societies like? What were their values? And that was basically like I think I mentioned before, but faith, family, hope in the future, self-sacrifice, and belief in something higher than yourself and caring about posterity, caring about what you leave behind for the next generation. And I think that all of those things are so wrapped up in our family, in our communities, in our churches, in our schools. And I think also, people are starting to see that there are the institutions like our schools actually and our government and even our entertainment that have become so corrupted. And so that's really not the place anymore to look for anything almost, but to look towards our loved ones and towards God. I think that the answer is not anything aesthetic, actually. It's completely in the internal and in our values and our morals. And that is where all true beauty comes from. It's our connection with the truth, which I think that is God, and I think that's Jesus. So
Amen.
say that. Yeah.
I'm glad you did. I agree with you on that. And thank you so much for saying that. That was beautifully put. Again, pardon the pun. Really, really well stated. I can't thank you enough. And you're right. I think that people, if we return to those and they see that somehow something is going to have to click, and there will have to
Mhm.
be a tipping point where people will just there'll the match point will just ignite at a point where enough people will live that to realize how important foundationally families and community is, and foster that, so that healing and recognition of values and aesthetic can be rekindled again. And let's have
Absolutely.
hope in that, and a recognition of God above all things. So Julia, I can't thank you enough for doing this, really. It's been a really amazing conversation with
I
you.
know. I
Yeah.
I I hope that, I'm like, "Oh, I don't know if we need to talk about music sometime." That would be awesome. Because
Yeah,
I think that
anytime.
you're such an incredible musician, and,
Thank
I
you.
was looking at all of your performances, and they're just so, so amazing, and, I
Very
just love
kind of you.
it's
Thank
such an
you.
honor to talk to you.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. I would love that, and to speak to your brother as well. I'd love to do
Oh
that
my
as well.
gosh. You would
I would
love
love
that.
that.
He would love that
We'll do
because
that.
He my brother Hudson and my other brother Harry Davis, he is a photographer who's also so talented and amazing, and we work a lot together. So that's why I
Excellent.
know, like, firsthand the family unit, and my mom just is the best kind of creative, like, unit that you can have. We all help each other. But
Right.
I was talking to my brothers, and they are the biggest fans of yours. Like, just the
That's
biggest fan.
wonderful.
And
Oh,
and
that's so
and Hudson
wonderful.
absolutely loves you so much.
My goodness. Well, I have to thank him for that. Really, both of your brothers. Thank you for that vote of confidence and recognition. And so, yeah, we'll have to resume this at some point, Julia. Is there anything that you would like to tell people about where to find you? I will post that as well.
Yes, so you can find my platform, The War on Beauty, on YouTube, Instagram, X, and TikTok at The War on Beauty. And my dress and jewelry company is called J Day Dress Co., which is J Day Dress Co. on the same platforms, and jdaydressco.com.
Excellent. All right, Julia, thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day. God bless
Thank you so much. It was such an honor to talk to you. God bless you too.
as well.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode of Breakfast with Vinnie.